The problem did not start as something dramatic or even suspicious, at least not at first. It began on a quiet suburban street where most days looked the same. Trash pickup happened early in the morning, usually before anyone had their coffee. The homeowner had lived there long enough to know the routine. Trash cans went out the night before and came back upright and empty by noon. That rhythm had stayed steady for years. Then one week, he came outside and saw his trash can lying on its side. Garbage was scattered across the driveway and part of the lawn. At first, he sighed and assumed it was the wind. Storms had been rolling through lately, and the lids on those cans were not the best. He cleaned it up, stood the can back up, and moved on with his day. The next week, it happened again. Same can, same spot, same mess. This time, the weather was calm. No strong winds, no rain, no sign that anything had blown through. He paused longer while picking up the trash, looking around as if the answer might be sitting somewhere obvious. A raccoon crossed his mind, but there were no bite marks, no ripped bags. Everything looked oddly deliberate, like the can had simply been pushed over. He shrugged it off again, telling himself not to overthink it. Small problems did not need big explanations. Still, a seed of doubt had been planted. By the third week, the doubt grew. The trash can was tipped over once more, but now there was something different. A printed warning notice from the HOA was tucked under the lid. It mentioned improper trash placement and failure to secure waste containers. The wording was polite but firm, the kind of letter that carried an unspoken threat of fines if ignored. That was confusing. The can had been placed exactly where the HOA rules required. Same spot he had used for years, same distance from the curb, same timing. Nothing had changed except the fact that it kept ending up on its side. He reread the notice twice, standing in his driveway with the morning sun already warming the pavement. It felt unfair, but more than that, it felt strange. How could he be blamed for something that seemed out of his control? Later that day, he mentioned it to a neighbor while getting the mail. The neighbor laughed quietly and said something that stuck. He mentioned a woman on the HOA board who took rules very seriously. Too seriously, some would say. She was known for walking the neighborhood early in the morning, clipboard in hand, watching for violations. Parking, lawn height, trash cans, nothing escaped her attention. At the time, the homeowner did not connect the dots fully. It felt a little dramatic to assume someone would knock over a trash can on purpose. That sounded petty, even for an HOA. Still, the idea lingered in the back of his mind. Over the next few days, he paid more attention to small details. He noticed how other trash cans on the street were left untouched, even when they were placed slightly out of line. He noticed how his can seemed to be the only one that ever caused a mess. He also noticed that the warning notice had been issued unusually fast, almost as if someone had been waiting for a reason. The pattern was starting to take shape, though he was not ready to name it yet. It felt uncomfortable to suspect someone without proof. He did not want to be the kind of person who blamed others without facts. Still, frustration crept in. Cleaning up trash every week was not just annoying, it was embarrassing. Passing cars slowed down, and neighbors glanced over. It made him look careless, even though he knew he was not. That night, as he rolled the trash can back into place, he stood there a moment longer than usual. The street was quiet. Porch lights glowed softly. Everything looked peaceful. Yet something about the situation felt off, like a calm surface hiding a small but intentional disturbance underneath. He went inside knowing one thing for sure. This was no longer just bad luck. Something was happening, and whether it was human or not, it was not going to stop on its own. The next encounter did not come with noise or mess, but with words, and that somehow made it heavier. A few days after the third tipped-over trash can, the homeowner was pulling into his driveway when he noticed someone standing near his mailbox. She was neatly dressed, posture stiff, holding a folder close to her chest like it was part of her identity rather than paperwork. She smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was the kind that stayed only on the lips and never reached the eyes. She introduced herself as a member of the HOA board and immediately began talking about community standards. Her voice was calm, almost pleasant, but the message underneath carried weight. She explained that several residents had raised concerns about trash cans being left out improperly. She said it was important to maintain appearances as property values depended on it. The homeowner listened quietly, nodding, even though confusion was building inside him. He knew he followed the rules. He always had. When he gently said that his trash can had been knocked over multiple times, she tilted her head slightly, as if considering whether that explanation was worth believing. She suggested that unsecured cans were more likely to fall. Then she added, almost casually, that repeated violations could lead to fines if the issue continued. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it lingered long after she walked away. Something about it felt off. She had not asked questions. She had not shown curiosity. She spoke as if the conclusion had already been reached and the talk was just a formality. The next trash day arrived quickly. That night, the homeowner made sure the can was placed exactly where it should be. He even double-checked the HOA guidelines online, reading them slowly to be certain. Everything was correct. There was no gray area. In the morning, he stepped outside with a knot in his stomach. The trash can was on its side again. Garbage spilled across the driveway like before. And once again, there was a notice. This one was more firm than the last. It mentioned potential penalties if compliance was not achieved. At that moment, frustration turned into something sharper. It was no longer just about trash. It was about being blamed for something he did not do. It was about being spoken to like a child who needed correcting, not a homeowner who deserved respect. He cleaned up the mess slowly, taking his time, thinking. The timing felt too perfect. The warning followed the conversation almost like a script. It was hard to ignore the connection now. Over the next few days, he paid attention to early mornings. He noticed how quiet the street was at that hour. Most people were still asleep. Dog walkers passed by occasionally, but rarely stopped. It was the kind of calm that allowed small actions to go unseen. He also started noticing the woman from the HOA more often. She walked the neighborhood regularly, always with purpose. She paused near houses, looking closely at yards and driveways. She wrote things down. She looked like someone who believed rules mattered more than context. Still, he resisted jumping to conclusions. Accusing someone without proof could backfire badly, especially when that person held authority. He reminded himself that feelings were not facts. Suspicion alone was not enough. Another neighbor casually mentioned getting a warning for something minor, something that had never been an issue before. The tone of that conversation felt familiar. A pattern was forming, not just for him, but for others too. The homeowner realized something important then. This situation was not going to resolve itself through polite explanations. Talking had not helped. Following the rules had not helped. Each step he took to be compliant only seemed to invite more scrutiny. That realization did not make him angry right away. It made him quiet. He became more careful, more observant. Instead of reacting, he began to watch. The trash can stood upright that night, exactly where it belonged. He looked at it longer than necessary before going inside. There was a sense now that this was no longer a random problem. It was personal, whether intended or not. Inside his house, he sat down and thought through his options. Complaining without evidence would lead nowhere. Arguing would only make things worse. If the problem was being created by someone else, then the only way forward was to understand exactly how and when it was happening. By the end of the night, his frustration had settled into resolve. He did not know yet what the next step would be, but he knew this much. He would stop guessing. He would stop assuming. And he would find the truth, quietly and carefully. By the fourth time the trash can was knocked over, the situation stopped feeling like a minor neighborhood issue and started feeling like a slow grind on his nerves. It was no longer surprising when he stepped outside and saw trash spread across the driveway. What surprised him was how normal the frustration was starting to feel. Annoyance had turned into a routine, and that bothered him more than the mess itself. This time, the cleanup took longer. A torn bag had spilled food waste onto the grass, and birds had already picked through it. He could feel eyes on him from passing cars, even if no one was really watching. The feeling of being judged settled in his chest, heavy and unfair. Anyone looking from the outside would assume he was careless, lazy, or disrespectful of the rules. None of that was true. Later that afternoon, another notice arrived by email from the HOA. The tone was colder now. It referenced ongoing noncompliance and warned of possible fines if the issue continued. Reading it made his jaw tighten. He had done everything right. The trash can placement matched the rules word for word. Yet here he was, being blamed again. What made it worse was the contradiction. The same group sending the warnings claimed to care about cleanliness and order, yet the problem itself was clearly being caused by interference. If the can stayed upright, there would be no mess. If there was no mess, there would be no violation. It felt like being punished for something that only existed because someone wanted it to. Over the next couple of weeks, the incidents kept happening. Not every trash day, but often enough to keep him on edge. Each time it happened, the cleanup felt heavier. He noticed small changes in his own behavior. He checked outside more often. He listened for sounds early in the morning. He felt tense over something that should have been simple. Sleep became lighter. On trash nights, he woke up earlier than usual, sometimes just before dawn, and stared at the ceiling. The quiet hours felt different now. They no longer felt peaceful. They felt like the perfect cover for something small and deliberate. He considered confronting the HOA board member again, but stopped himself. The first conversation had already shown him how that would go. She would deny it or twist the blame back onto him. Without proof, he would just sound bitter. Worse, he could be labeled as difficult, which would only make future issues harder. A neighbor mentioned receiving a fine for leaving a recycling bin out a few hours too long. Another complained about being warned for grass that was barely over the allowed height. These were not serious problems, but they were treated like major violations. The same name kept coming up in these conversations. The same early morning walks. The same clipboard. The homeowner began to understand something important. This was not about trash cans. It was about control. It was about someone enforcing rules not to maintain order, but to feel authority over others. Once that idea settled in his mind, the situation made more sense. Still, understanding the motive did not solve the problem. The trash can continue to be knocked over. The notices continued to arrive. The threat of fines hung in the background like a cloud that refused to move. One morning, after cleaning up yet another mess, he stood in his driveway longer than usual. He looked up and down the street. Other cans stood upright and untouched. His was the only one that ever seemed to cause trouble. The unfairness of it pressed down on him. That was the moment he stopped feeling powerless. Anger faded, replaced by clarity. He realized that reacting emotionally had gotten him nowhere. Complaining had gotten him nowhere. Doing nothing had only made things worse. He needed facts, not opinions, not suspicions. Facts that could not be argued away or brushed off. He needed to know exactly what was happening, when it was happening, and who was involved. That decision changed how he saw the situation. Instead of feeling trapped, he felt focused. The problem was no longer overwhelming. It was specific, and specific problems could be handled. That night, as he placed the trash can by the curb, he did it calmly. He checked the position, then stepped back and looked at it. The street was quiet. Lights were dim. Everything looked ordinary. But now, he was no longer just waiting for something to happen. He was preparing to understand it. By the time the problem reached this stage, the homeowner understood one clear truth. Guessing was no longer useful. Feelings were not enough. If he wanted the situation to stop, he needed clarity, not confrontation. That realization quietly changed everything. Instead of reacting the next time the trash can was knocked over, he paused. He cleaned the mess as usual, but his mind was working differently now. He began to think in terms of patterns instead of moments. When did it happen? How often? What stayed the same each time? These were questions that mattered more than frustration. He started small. On a piece of paper, he wrote down dates. Trash days. The condition of the weather. Whether there had been wind. Whether other cans nearby were disturbed. It felt strange at first, like he was taking notes on something that should never have needed notes. Still, writing things down brought a sense of order. The situation stopped feeling chaotic and started feeling measurable. He noticed that the trash can was never tipped over on days with heavy rain or strong winds. It only happened on calm mornings. It also never happened when trash pickup was delayed. The timing was too exact to ignore. Quietly, without telling anyone, he decided to take the next step. He researched options carefully. He was not interested in drama or revenge. He wanted to protect himself and stay within the rules. That part mattered. The HOA had strict guidelines about surveillance and privacy, and he did not want to give anyone a reason to turn the situation against him. He chose something simple and discreet. A small motion-activated camera designed for personal property, nothing flashy or obvious. It would only cover his driveway and the area immediately around the trash can. No neighbors, no sidewalk, no public space, just his own space. Installing it took less time than he expected. He placed it carefully, testing angles and distance until it captured exactly what he needed and nothing more. Once it was set, he felt an unexpected calm. For the first time in weeks, He felt like he was doing something constructive instead of waiting to be blamed again. He did not tell neighbors. He did not mention it to the HOA. He kept going about his routine as if nothing had changed. Trash went out at the same time. The can was placed the same way. From the outside, everything looked normal. Inside, though, his mindset had shifted. Each morning after trash day, he checked the footage quietly. At first, there was nothing. Hours of stillness. A passing cat. Headlights sweeping across the driveway. Silence. Then, one early morning, something finally happened. A figure entered the frame slowly. There was no rush, no hesitation. The person glanced around, then stepped closer to the trash can. With a quick push, the can tipped over. The lid popped open. Trash spilled out. The figure paused for a second, adjusted the can slightly, and walked away. The homeowner watched the clip more than once. Not because he enjoyed it, but because he needed to be certain. The action was clear. It was intentional. There was no accident. No mistake. Over the next few days, the same thing happened again. Same timing. Same movement. Same person. The pattern was undeniable now. What surprised him most was not anger, but disappointment. Seeing it confirmed took away any lingering doubt, but it also made the situation feel smaller. Less mysterious. Less powerful. It was no longer a story in his head. It was a fact on a screen. He continued recording without changing his behavior. He let the evidence build naturally. Each clip added weight. Each moment reinforced the truth. This was not a one-time lapse. It was repeated behavior. With each passing day, his stress faded. Knowing the truth was grounding. He slept better. He stopped checking the window in the early hours. The tension that had followed him for weeks finally loosened its grip. He was careful not to rush the next step. Acting too soon could weaken his position. He understood now that patience mattered. Documentation mattered. Calm mattered. By the end of that week, he had everything he needed. Not opinions. Not assumptions. Clear proof. The trash can still went out like always. But now, instead of dread, there was quiet confidence. The situation was no longer happening to him. He understood it. And that made all the difference. The moment of confirmation did not arrive with satisfaction or relief the way people often imagine. It arrived quietly, almost uneasily. Sitting alone, watching the footage again, the homeowner felt a strange mix of emotions. There was no thrill in being right. Instead, there was a heavy sense of clarity. What he had suspected was now undeniable. He watched carefully, slowing the video down, paying attention to details. The early morning light, the steady walk, the brief pause to check surroundings. This was not careless behavior. It was deliberate, planned, repeated. The same person appeared again in another clip from a different day, moving with the same confidence, as if the act itself carried no risk. The realization shifted something inside him. The problem was no longer personal frustration. It was misuse of power. Someone trusted to enforce rules was breaking them, and doing so quietly, assuming no one would ever push back. He did not react right away. He did not storm into an HOA meeting or confront anyone on the street. He knew that kind of reaction would only weaken his position. Emotion could easily be turned against him. Evidence, however, spoke for itself. Over the next several days, he continued gathering footage. Each recording added another layer of confirmation. Same behavior, same timing, same person. The trash can did not fall on its own. It was pushed every time. During this period, he kept his routine unchanged. He waved at neighbors. He followed the rules carefully. He responded politely to HOA emails. From the outside, nothing seemed different. Inside, he felt steadier than he had in weeks. One afternoon, another notice arrived from the HOA. This one referenced potential fines if the trash issue continued. He read it calmly. The words no longer carried the same weight. He knew the truth now, and that knowledge gave him control. Instead of responding emotionally, he began organizing everything. He labeled files. He wrote down dates and times that matched the footage. He noted how warnings were issued immediately after incidents. The pattern told a clear story when viewed as a whole. He also reviewed the HOA bylaws again, slowly and carefully. There were sections about harassment, about interference with personal property, about abuse of authority by board members. Reading those rules felt different now. They were no longer abstract guidelines. They were tools. What stood out most was how careful he had been to stay within the boundaries himself. The camera placement followed the rules. The documentation was factual, not emotional. Nothing he had done could be reasonably challenged. That mattered. In systems built on paperwork and procedures, tone and preparation often decide outcomes more than truth alone. The homeowner considered different paths forward. He could confront the person directly, but that risked denial and escalation. He could ignore it, but that would only allow the behavior to continue, not just toward him, but likely toward others as well. He realized this was bigger than his trash can. If someone was willing to create violations to justify enforcement, others were probably affected too. He had already heard stories. Now he had proof. That understanding shaped his decision. He chose the route that relied least on personal conflict and most on process. He prepared a formal complaint, addressed not to the board member involved, but to the HOA management company itself, the entity responsible for oversight. He kept the tone neutral. He described events clearly. He included evidence without commentary. No accusations. No emotional language. Just facts. Submitting that complaint did not feel dramatic. It felt quiet, intentional, almost boring. And that, he realized, was exactly why it would work. After sending it, he felt an unexpected calm. There was no need to monitor the camera constantly anymore. No need to anticipate the next mess. Whatever happened next would not be based on guesswork. That evening, as he placed the trash can by the curb, he noticed how normal the act felt again. Just a task, not a trigger, not a source of stress. For the first time in a long while, he knew the situation had shifted. The problem was no longer hidden. And once something is seen clearly, it loses much of its power. The response did not come right away, and that was expected. Systems like HOAs move slowly, especially when the issue involves one of their own. Still, the homeowner felt different now. Waiting no longer felt helpless. It felt intentional. A few days passed, then a week. During that time, something interesting happened. The trash can stayed upright. No spills. No mess. No new warning notices. The quiet itself felt meaningful, as if a switch had been flipped somewhere behind the scenes. He resisted the urge to feel victorious. He knew better. Silence did not always mean resolution. Sometimes it meant review. Sometimes it meant someone realizing they had been seen. Then an email arrived from the HOA management company. The tone was formal but careful. They acknowledged receipt of his complaint. They thanked him for the documentation. They said the matter was under review and asked him not to discuss it with other residents while the process continued. That last part stood out. Not discuss it. That suggested the issue was being taken seriously. He replied briefly, confirming his understanding and offering to provide additional information if needed. He did not add commentary. He did not press. He kept his responses clean and professional. In the following days, subtle changes appeared around the neighborhood. The HOA board member was still seen walking, but not with the same confidence. The clipboard was gone. The walks were shorter. There was less stopping, less inspecting. Other neighbors noticed too, even if no one said it outright. Conversations shifted. Complaints about warnings stopped. The tension that had quietly existed on the street began to loosen. Then came another message. This one asked for permission to use the footage as part of an internal review. The homeowner agreed, with one condition. His identity would remain confidential during the initial process. The management company accepted. At this point, the situation no longer felt personal. It felt procedural. That was a relief. A meeting was scheduled, not with him, but within the HOA structure. He was not invited, and he did not expect to be. What mattered was that the process was moving forward without him needing to push. A few days later, a final email arrived. The wording was careful, almost overly neutral. It stated that the issue had been investigated, that corrective action had been taken, that prior warnings related to trash placement would be withdrawn, that no fines would be applied. There was no apology, no explanation, just resolution. That was enough. Later that week, he noticed something else. A notice was posted announcing changes to board responsibilities. One position was now listed as vacant. Another resident had been temporarily assigned oversight until a formal vote could be held. No names were mentioned. None were needed. The homeowner felt no urge to celebrate. What he felt instead was balance returning. The neighborhood felt lighter, more normal. Trash cans went out and came back without incident. People waved again without tension underneath the gesture. What struck him most was how little drama it had taken. No shouting, no public confrontation, no social media posts, just calm observation and patience. He reflected on how easily the situation could have gone differently. If he had reacted emotionally early on, he might have been labeled difficult. If he had ignored it, the behavior might have spread or escalated. If he had confronted without proof, he would have lost credibility. Instead, he had chosen to let the truth speak quietly. That lesson stayed with him, not just about HOAs, but about systems in general. Power often depends on the assumption that no one is paying attention. The moment attention becomes steady and documented, power shifts. Weeks later, he removed the camera. There was no need for it anymore. The trash can stood where it always had, doing its simple job without trouble. Sometimes the most effective response is not louder rules or sharper words, but patience, clarity, and a willingness to let reality reveal itself. The consequences did not arrive with announcements or dramatic meetings. They arrived quietly, in small changes that were easy to miss if someone was not paying attention. But for the homeowner, every detail stood out. First, the warning notices stopped completely. No emails. No printed slips tucked under lids. Weeks passed without a single reminder about trash placement. That alone felt strange after months of constant pressure. Then something else happened. A few neighbors started talking, carefully at first. One mentioned that an old warning had suddenly disappeared from their HOA account. Another said a fine they were sure was coming never showed up. No one spoke loudly about it. No one named names. But the mood on the street had shifted. The homeowner noticed fewer rule enforcement walks in the early mornings. The familiar figure was gone. In her place was silence. The sidewalks felt like sidewalks again, not inspection routes. An HOA newsletter arrived a short time later. Most of it was boring updates about landscaping and pool hours. But one paragraph stood out. It mentioned a renewed focus on fair enforcement, transparency, and respectful communication with residents. The wording was careful, almost stiff, but the meaning was clear. Someone had crossed a line, and the system was trying to correct itself without drawing attention. Not long after that, a neighbor stopped him while he was bringing groceries inside. The neighbor hesitated, then quietly thanked him. He did not explain why, and the homeowner did not ask. They both understood enough. That moment mattered more than any official notice. It confirmed what he had suspected. He had not been the only one affected. Others had felt the pressure, the unfairness, the fear of being singled out. They just had not known how to respond. The board itself changed tone. Emails became more neutral. Language softened. Instead of threats of fines, messages focused on reminders and cooperation. It was subtle, but it was real. One afternoon, he noticed a new name listed as a temporary board contact. Someone unfamiliar. Someone local. Someone who waved and smiled like a neighbor, not an enforcer. That alone said plenty. The woman who had once seemed so present was no longer visible in community roles. She still lived nearby, but the authority she once carried was gone. There were no scenes, no confrontations, just a quiet removal from power. The homeowner felt a mix of relief and reflection. He did not feel proud in a loud way. He felt grounded. The outcome had not come from aggression. It had come from patience and accuracy. He thought back to the early weeks, when frustration had clouded his thinking, when he had almost confronted her out of anger, when he had doubted himself and wondered if he was imagining things. If he had acted then, the story would have ended very differently. Instead, he had waited. He had observed. He had let the truth speak for itself. That approach did not just protect him. It protected the community. Rules were still there, but now they felt fair again. Predictable. Shared. That was the balance people wanted, even if they never said it out loud. Trash days returned to being boring. Kins went out. Trucks came. Kins came back upright. No mess. No stress. No second thoughts. Life moved on, but the lesson stayed. Power does not always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a clipboard and a smile. And resistance does not always look loud either. Sometimes it looks like calm notes on paper and quiet follow-through. The homeowner never told the full story publicly. He did not need to. The results spoke clearly enough. The neighborhood felt calmer. Trust slowly rebuilt. People stopped walking on eggshells. In the end, the real consequence was not punishment. It was correction, a reminder that authority without accountability does not last, and that even small, everyday problems can reveal bigger truths when handled with patience and care. The trash can have been the problem on the surface, but underneath, the story had always been about fairness. Time passed, and with it came a sense of normalcy that had been missing for months. The neighborhood settled back into its quiet rhythm, the kind that fades into the background of daily life. For the homeowner, this calm felt earned, not accidental. It was the result of patience, attention, and a choice to act thoughtfully instead of emotionally. Trash days became ordinary again. The can went out the night before and came back empty and upright, just as it should. No mess, no notes, no tension. What once caused a knot in his stomach now barely registered as a task on his to-do list. That shift alone felt like a small victory. He noticed changes beyond his own driveway. Neighbors seemed more relaxed. People lingered a little longer outside. Conversations felt lighter. The quiet stress that had hovered over the street had lifted, even if most people never consciously acknowledged it. The HOA, too, had changed in subtle ways. Communication was clearer. Rules were explained instead of threatened. When reminders were sent, they came with understanding rather than suspicion. It was not perfect, but it was better, more human. Looking back, the homeowner realized how close he had come to handling everything differently. Anger had been easy. Confrontation had been tempting. It would have felt satisfying in the moment, but it would have led nowhere. What actually worked was slower, quieter, and far less dramatic. That realization stayed with him, not just as a lesson about HOAs, but about conflict in general. Many problems grow larger because people rush to react instead of taking time to understand. When emotions lead, facts often get lost. He also learned something about power. It often relies on silence and assumption. As long as people accept unfair treatment without question, it continues. But the moment someone pays attention and documents reality, the balance shifts. The woman who once walked the neighborhood with confidence no longer held that position. There was no public fallout, no gossip-filled meetings, just a quiet change that spoke louder than any argument. Authority had been corrected, not attacked. The homeowner did not feel the need to share his experience widely. The point was never recognition. The point was resolution. Life felt better when things worked the way they were supposed to. Occasionally, he caught himself glancing at the driveway on trash mornings, a habit left over from weeks of stress. Each time, he saw the same thing. Order. Calm. Nothing out of place. The habit slowly faded. The camera stayed packed away. It had served its purpose. He did not like the idea of monitoring his own life, and he was glad it was no longer necessary. Trust had returned, and that mattered. In the end, the story did not end with revenge or embarrassment. It ended with balance. Rules were still rules, but they were applied fairly. People felt respected again. The neighborhood felt like a community, not a checklist. He reflected on how small the original problem had seemed. A tipped trash can, a warning notice, easy to dismiss, easy to ignore. Yet those small moments had revealed something important about how systems work and how they fail. Sometimes, standing up for yourself does not mean standing loudly. Sometimes it means standing patiently and letting the truth do the work. As seasons changed and new routines formed, the memory of those weeks slowly softened. It became a story with a lesson rather than a source of anger, a reminder that fairness matters, even in the smallest details. The trash can stay upright, and with it, so did his sense of peace.